The wind cut sharp across the ridges, carrying with it the sound of something primal, something that belonged more to the dark wild than to the fragile world of men. A cabin sat against the slope of the tree line, its walls rough-hewn from pine, smoke trailing faint from its chimney. Inside, a man leaned over a table where a lantern threw restless shadows against the boards. His face was hardened by years, not from age but from grief, and his eyes carried the sort of silence one owned after losing too much. He had come west to forget, to bury memories of a family taken by fever, but the wilderness did not let a man forget. It tested him instead, day after day, demanding that he prove himself worthy of the breath in his lungs. The howls came again, closer now, stretched across the night like cords strung too tight. He paused, listening. Wolves did not come this near unless hunger pressed them to desperation. He knew their ways. He had crossed their paths in lean winters before. The rifle by the door stood waiting, its stock worn smooth by his hands. He took it up, not out of eagerness but of necessity. He had hoped for one quiet night, a rare reprieve from the weight of solitude. The wilderness, however, did not bend to hope. Snow lay heavy outside, each step breaking its crust with crunch. The moon caught in patches between moving clouds, washing the forest in silver. He moved carefully, his breath white in the cold, ears tuned to the shifting cries. Then, beneath the wild chorus, another sound came faint, thin, human, a cry too small to belong in the endless dark. His stride changed, quickened. Through the trees he found them, a woman stumbling in the snow, her garments foreign against the endless white, her arm clutched around a small figure pressed to her chest. A child's sobs broke through the cold air. Wolves circled, shadows with teeth, eyes burning with a fever of hunger. The pack darted in, testing her, forcing her back step by step. The man raised his rifle, breath steadying into the rhythm of old habit. The crack of the shot split the night, flame bursting from the muzzle. One wolf dropped, rolling across the snow. The others shrank back, snarls deep in their throats. The woman's eyes turned toward him, wide with terror and disbelief. She did not know who he was or whether he was more danger than the beasts. But there was no time for doubt. Another wolf leapt, teeth flashing. The man's second shot rang true, throwing the creature limp into the snow. He shouted, driving forward, brandishing the rifle like a staff when the chamber emptied. Wolves scattered at last, melting into the forest, their howls trailing into the distance. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the noise that came before. The woman trembled where she stood, clutching the girl close. Snow clung to their hair and clothing. He lowered his rifle, lifting his hand slightly to show peace. The words did not come easily. She looked at him with suspicion, sharpened by fear, her breathing ragged. The child hid her face in her mother's sleeve, eyes peering out only for an instant before burying again. The man spoke softly, his voice rough from disuse. He told them his cabin was near, that the cold would claim them if they stayed. She hesitated, the weight of mistrust clear in her gaze. He did not press, only turned back toward his home, leaving his tracks wide in the snow should she choose to follow. Steps crunched behind him after a long pause. He allowed himself a breath he had not known he was holding. Inside the cabin, warmth embraced him in the glow of the small fire. The woman kept her child close, eyes still sharp, wary of every movement he made. He gave them space, setting water to boil, laying another log upon the fire. The girl's cheeks were raw with cold, her small hands red and trembling. He slid a wool blanket across the floor toward them. The woman took it with a nod, wrapping her daughter first before drawing it around herself. No words bridged the silence between them, yet something in the quiet exchange spoke of fragile trust beginning to take root. The man studied them without staring. He knew from the cut of her clothes and the lilt of her faint accent that she had come from far beyond these mountains. Chinese, he thought, though the story of how she had arrived here in the snowbound frontier was hidden behind eyes that revealed nothing. He did not ask. Questions were luxuries for safe places, not nights when survival clung by a thread. He contented himself with stoking the fire, with a small comfort of hearing another soul breathe under his roof. When the child drifted into uneasy sleep, the woman's shoulders slackened. Exhaustion took her, though her hand never let go of her daughter's small fingers. The man sat apart, the rifle leaning within reach, his gaze fixed on the fire. The wolves had been driven off, but hunger did not vanish with a shot. They would return, and perhaps with more boldness. He had seen packs linger for days, testing the resolve of men until either side gave way. His mind wandered, unbidden, to his past. He remembered another small child, fever burning through her body while he sat helpless, watching life slip away despite all prayers, all effort. His wife had followed soon after, the sickness unmerciful. That loss had driven him west, away from places where memories cut too deep. Yet here, in this cabin, with strangers under his roof, the old wounds reopened. He told himself it was chance, that he owed them nothing. But chance had the weight of fate tonight, and he could not turn his back on it. The fire dwindled, shadows lengthening along the walls. He stood, added more wood, then paused at the door, listening again. The night carried only silence, but silence in the wilderness was never to be trusted. He returned to his chair, resting the rifle across his lap. His eyes closed only in brief, stolen moments, never fully yielding to sleep. When morning came, pale light pushing through frost-furred windows, the forest seemed calmer, though calm was often a mask before storm. The woman rose cautiously, offering a quiet bow of her head. She had no words he could understand, but gratitude lived in her eyes. The child peered at him with less fear now, curiosity mingling in her gaze. He gave him a piece of dried venison, watched the girl nibble at it with shy hunger. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something beyond survival. Responsibility. Purpose. It unsettled him as much as it steadied him. He did not know what path his encounter would carve, only that the wilderness had shifted its weight upon his shoulders. Last night had been the beginning, not the end. He stepped outside, the cold morning cutting sharp against his skin. The snow bore tracks where the wolves had circled, restless and close. He studied them, sensing the forest still held eyes upon him. The woman stood at the doorway, her daughter clinging to her hand. She looked at him not as a savior, but as a man bound by circumstance to a fate larger than either had chosen. He returned the look with one of quiet resolve. The wilderness had brought them together in blood and fay. Now it held them in its grasp, and it would not let go easily. Something in the stillness of the morning told him their trial had only begun, that the true danger waited just beyond sight. And though he had lived alone for so long, he felt in his bones that solitude had ended the moment he pulled the trigger beneath the moonlight. The day after the wolves had tested the line between life and death, dawn broke with a pale light that gave no promise of warmth. The man woke early, as he always did, though sleep had been shallow and restless. He stepped outside with his rifle, eyes scanning the snow-covered ridges. He was straining for any sign that the night's danger had followed him into morning. The silence was strange, stretched tight like a bowstring. The wolves had gone, yet unease lingered. He turned back to the cabin. So the woman standing in the doorway with her daughter clutched close, both of them watching him with the quiet expectancy of people who had no choice but to depend on a stranger. He gave them a nod, an unspoken reassurance, before returning inside. The fire had burned low, and he stoked it to life again, filling the room with a faint crackle of flames. The child's eyes followed his every move. She was beginning to understand that his presence meant safety, though a small hand never let go of her mother's dress. The woman spoke a few words he could not understand, her voice soft yet firm, then fell silent when she saw he did not grasp her meaning. He answered with gesture instead, pointing toward the venison and bread, sliding it across the table. She hesitated before accepting, breaking the food first for the child. Her every action spoke of caution, but also of dignity. For a moment, peace settled into the cabin. But peace is fragile in lands where suspicion grows faster than crops. By mid-morning, the sound of hooves broke across the frozen ground. The man stiffened, moving to the window. Dark figures appeared between the trees, riders drawing closer. He recognized them before their faces came clear. Settlers from the valley, men who carried the law of numbers and prejudice more than any written code. Their presence here was not a courtesy visit. His jaw tightened. The riders dismounted, spreading into a half-circle around the cabin. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a weather-beaten hat and eyes that measured everything as possession, called out. He demanded to know who the strangers were, why the man was harboring them. His voice was full of the authority men give themselves when they believe the land belongs only to them. The man stepped outside, rifle resting easy but firm in his grip. He did not raise it, but he did not lower it either. He said the woman and child were under his protection. That should have been enough, but he knew it would not be. The leader sneered, declaring that Chinese had no place here, that they brought nothing but trouble, that the land was not for them. He told the man to hand the woman and girl over, to let them be driven out before worse came of it. Behind him, the others shifted, murmuring agreement, their hands resting too easily on rifle stocks and revolvers. The air smelled of gunpowder before any trigger had been touched. The man weighed his words carefully. He told them no harm would come to the woman or her daughter while they stayed under his roof. His voice carried not as a challenge, but as a line drawn in the snow. For a moment, silence pressed down, broken only by the snort of horses and the distant creak of ice in the trees. Then the leader laughed, though there was no humor in it. He promised a return with more men if need be, that the cabin would not stand as a sanctuary for outsiders. He gave a final look, long and hard, before swinging onto his horse and leading the others away. The man watched them vanish into the woods, though he knew they had not gone far. He returned inside, met the woman's anxious gaze. She had not understood the words, but she knew the meaning. Fear shadowed her eyes, but she held herself steady for the sake of her daughter. The child clutched the blanket tighter, sensing the storm building outside these walls. He set his rifle on the table, leaning against it as if the weight of what was to come pressed heavy already. As dusk approached, the forest shifted. Branches snapped where no deer moved, and whispers carried in the wind that did not belong to the trees. The man knew they were being surrounded. He checked his ammunition, laid out what little he had. The cabin was sturdy but not built for war. He glanced at the woman, then at the child who dozed lightly against the side. The thought crossed his mind. Perhaps it would be easier to send them away, to let the settlers chase them into the night while he stayed behind. But his heart recoiled from the idea. He had chosen to stand between them and harm. Abandoning them now would be a betrayal not only of them but of himself. The night deepened, and with it came the settling of resolve. Then, without sound or warning, another figure appeared at the edge of the firelight outside. The man tense, rifle lifted, but what stepped into view was not another settler. It was a lone native, tall and silent, dressed in warm buckskin, a bow slung across his back and a scar carved deep across his cheek. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had measured life against death too many times. For a long moment, they studied one another. Trust did not come easily between men of their worlds. Yet the native did not draw a weapon nor step back into the dark. He merely stood, watching, as if deciding whether to leave or to stay. The woman inside pulled her daughter close, fear rising again. The man lowered his rifle slowly, showing he would not strike first. The silence stretched, then broke with the faintest nod from the native. He moved closer to the cabin, not entering but settling nearby, as if to say he too had seen the threat gathering. Words were few, unnecessary. The alliance was tentative, fragile, but real. Through the hours that followed, they prepared as best they could. The man showed the woman how to bar the windows with boards, how to stack what furniture they had against the doors. She worked without complaint, strength hidden beneath a quiet demeanor. The child tried to help, her small hands carrying scraps of wood, her eyes bright with determination beyond her years. The native sharpened arrows by the firelight, each scrape of stone against shaft carrying the promise of resistance. They were three strangers bound together not by choice but by the force of encroaching danger. When hunger stirred, the woman cooked what little they had left. She placed food before the man, then before the native, her gestures small but meaningful. The child offered the man a scrap of bread before nibbling her own piece, her eyes searching his face for approval. He gave a rare smile, faint and fleeting, but enough to ease attention for an instant. In those small moments, trust rooted itself deeper, not in word but in shared hardship. Outside, torches flickered in the distance, their glow like restless eyes in the forest. The settlers had returned, more of them now, voices carrying rough and angry through the night. They called for the man by name, demanding he release the woman and child. They warned him that siding with outsiders would cost him dearly. Their threats clawed at the walls, at the hearts inside, but the man did not answer. He sat with his rifle across his knees, the native standing silent by the door, the woman holding her daughter close. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and all waited for the storm to break. The siege had begun, though no shot had yet been fired. What pressed upon them was heavier than weapons. It was a weight of fear, of mistrust, of history soaked in blood. The man felt it pressing down, testing his resolve. Yet in the silence of that cabin, in the faces of those who now depended on him, he found strength where once he had carried only sorrow. The wolves of the wilderness had been dangerous, but men were worse. Still, he would not yield. The night stretched long, broken by sudden shouts, by the sound of boots crunching snow, by the creak of wood as settlers tested the strength of the cabin's defenses. Each noise made the woman flinch, made the child bury her face against her mother's chest. The man steadied them with calm gestures, never letting his fear show. The native spoke little, but when he met the man's gaze, the bond between them deepened without need for words. They were outnumbered, but they were not alone. Toward dawn, the voices outside quieted, though the glow of torches still burned. The settlers were waiting, patient as predators. Inside, the small band of defenders sat close, their exhaustion heavy, yet their spirits unbroken. The man looked at them, at the woman who had trusted him with her daughter's life, at the child who had offered him bread with innocent courage, at the native who had chosen to stand with him despite the old scars between their peoples. Something shifted in him then, a realization that the walls of his cabin were no longer just timber and nails. They were bound now by something stronger, trust forged in the crucible of danger. And as the first gray light of morning bled into the sky, he understood that when the settlers struck next, it would not be a battle of numbers alone. It would be a test of will, of loyalty, of the fragile yet unyielding bonds they had formed. The wilderness had drawn them together. The settlers had turned them into a fortress of necessity, and soon the reckoning would come. He adjusted his rifle. The native strung his bow. The woman held her daughter close. None spoke, for words were no longer needed. They were ready. The sky bled pale as the last shadows of night yielded to dawn, and with that thin light came the final measure of resolve. Smoke hung in the trees where the settlers had tended their fires through the dark hours, and the cabin sat quiet, a fortress born of desperation rather than design. Inside, the man checked his rifle one last time, running a thumb along the stock as if to draw strength from its weight. He had stood against wolves, against the gnawing silence of grief, but this was different. What gathered beyond those walls was not hunger alone. It was hatred clothed in flesh, sharpened by numbers, ready to grind down all that stood in its path. The woman sat with her daughter close, the child's small hand clutching her mother's sleeve as though that grip alone could ward off a storm. Fear marked her face, yet there was also a quiet endurance in the way she met the man's gaze. She did not plead, did not weep. She understood, as he did, that words were brittle in the face of what loomed. Across the room, the native crouched by the fire, binding the last of his arrows with a calm precision that belied the violence about to erupt. His presence was a steady flame, enigmatic yet unwavering. Though nothing had been spoken of loyalty, it was clear he had chosen his side. The first shot cracked from the tree line, shattering the stillness and splintering wood from the cabin wall. The child startled, but the man's voice steadied her, low and firm. He moved to the window slit, returned fire, his shot echoing across the valley. A cry followed, sharp and pained, and the siege was no longer a threat but a reality. Settlers surged forward, their shouts filling the air. Bullets struck, some biting into timber, others tearing past too close. The cabin trembled under the barrage. The native loosed an arrow, swift and silent, and one of the attackers staggered back, clutching his side. The woman pulled her daughter behind the heavy table they had overturned for cover, her body shielding the child with unyielding determination. The man fought methodically, each shot deliberate, conserving ammunition. He felt the weight of every trigger pulled, not merely as an act of survival, but as a choice pressed upon him by a fate he had not sought. The settlers pressed harder, emboldened by numbers. Smoke from their torches thickened, carried by the morning breeze toward the cabin. Fire was their weapon now. The coward's blade meant to consume where bullets failed. Flames licked at the outer walls, and the smell of burning pine filled the air. The woman coughed, covering her daughter's face with a cloth. The man's chest tightened. He knew what fire meant. This was no longer a siege. It was an attempt to erase them from the earth. Rain broke then, sudden and violent, a storm rolling down from the mountains as if the wilderness itself had chosen to intervene. The flames hissed, weakened under the deluge, though smoke still curled in angry tendrils. Mud churned outside, horses reared, settlers cursed. The storm did not stop the battle, but twisted it into chaos. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling so deep it rattled the bones. In that maelstrom, man and nature collided, each testing the will of the other. The leader of the settlers, the broad-shouldered man with the weather-worn hat, pushed through the storm, shouting above the thunder. His eyes locked on the cabin with a hunger of conquest. This was no longer about fear of strangers. It was about dominance, about proving no man could defy his will. He rallied his men, pressed them forward, determined to tear down the walls and the lives within. The clash reached its peak as settlers broke against the cabin like a tide. The man met them at the door, rifle empty now, wielded as a club. He struck, fought with the raw ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. A figure lunged through the smoke, and he grappled, the fight brutal, hands clawing, teeth bared. Mud and blood mingled as they struggled. A blade flashed, catching his arm, but he turned the knife, drove it back, survival carved into each desperate motion. The native stood beside him, bow discarded for a fallen tomahawk, moving with the lethal grace of someone shaped by endless conflict. He cut through the attackers with unflinching resolve, his presence as vital as the wolves themselves. The woman, though unarmed, was no mere bystander. She hurled boiling water from the fire, scalding one who forced his way too close. Her daughter clung to her, eyes wide, absorbing the reality that survival demanded courage from them all. Then came the leader himself, bursting into the cabin as lightning lit his face. He towered, rage and certainty burning in his eyes. He roared at the man to stand aside, to surrender the woman and child. But the man answered only with silence and the swing of his weapon. Their fight was raw, stripped of finesse, a clash of wills more than strength. They slammed against the table, against the walls, every strike echoing with years of grief and anger. The leader's fists were heavy, his knife flashing dangerously close. But the man fought with something the other did not have, the refusal to let the past repeat, the unwillingness to let innocence be devoured by cruelty. Blow after blow, the struggle seemed endless until at last a man found his moment. He seized a knife, turned it in one swift, desperate movement, and drove it home. The leader's eyes widened, breath caught, and then the fight left him in a shudder. He collapsed, the storm outside raging as if mocking his fall. The remaining settlers faltered. Their leader was gone, their numbers broken by resistance fiercer than they had imagined. Some dragged the wounded away, others fled into the trees, their shouts swallowed by thunder. What remained was silence broken only by rain striking earth, by the heaving breaths of those who had endured. The cabin stood scarred, its walls blackened, its roof dripping, but it stood. The man leaned against the frame, blood on his arm, exhaustion heavy in his bones. He looked at the woman, at the child clinging to her side, at the native who stood calm amid the wreckage. They were alive, though at a cost that could not be measured only in wounds. He saw in their faces what he had not seen in his own reflection for years: purpose. When the storm eased, the fire gone, the bodies taken by those who fled or left the mud, quiet settled once more. The man stepped outside, breathing the sharp scent of rain-washed earth. His cabin was damaged beyond easy repair, its roof sagging, its walls cracked. It no longer felt like home, but perhaps that was fitting. His life had been one of isolation, of walls built to keep the world at bay. Now those walls had been tested, broken, and in their ruin lay the shape of something new. The woman joined him, her daughter at her side. She said nothing, but her eyes spoke 1,000 words of gratitude, of trust, of shared survival. The native approached too, giving a slight nod before turning toward the wilderness, his path his own. Yet the bond forged in fire and storm would not vanish with his steps. He had been ally, guardian, proof that trust could be born in the unlikeliest of places. The man looked down at the girl, her small hand reaching tentatively for his. For a moment, he hesitated, the ghost of his lost family pressing close. But then he took her hand, the warmth of it anchoring him in a way he had not felt in years. It was a choice, not of obligation but of will. The wilderness had given him grief, had stripped him bare, but in this moment it offered him something else, a chance to belong again, not to the land, but to the fragile bond of lives intertwined. He knew the road ahead would be harsh. Prejudice would not vanish, danger would not fade. Yet as he stood in the soft gray light of dawn, with a woman and her daughter beside him, he felt the stirrings of resilience, of hope carved from hardship. His cabin might be gone, His solitude shattered, but in their place lay something far stronger. The choice had been made, though it was less a decision than a truth revealed by fire and storm. He would walk with them into the uncertainty of tomorrow, carrying not only his rifle and scars, but also the fragile trust that had been born in the crucible of this reckoning. The wilderness still loomed vast and merciless around them, but for the first time in years he did not face it alone. And as the rain faded to silence and the first true light of morning stretched across the valley, he stepped forward, leaving behind the ruins of what he once was, moving toward the uncertain promise of what they might yet become together.